pray for your pastors. Like there is a real target on their back. The enemy really does want to destroy them, because if he can destroy them, it usually has a very negative impact on the church where they lead, and a negative impact on the view of the kingdom in that community.
Hey, welcome to Chapel Chat. We are so glad that you are watching and or listening with us today. My name is Titus. I am the youth pastor at Christian Chapel, and I'm with Chris Dow, our lead pastor here at Christian Chapel.
Did you forget where you were the youth pastor at for just a moment?
Did I pause there awkwardly?
Christian Chapel.
There was something I was thinking of, and then I can't even tell you what I was thinking of right now.
If it was the other church you applied at, we will murder you?
Yeah, no, I did not.
Just making sure.
Never will I.
All right.
Apply anywhere else. The reality is we have to talk about a pretty heavy topic today. It's pastoral failures, and it seems like we've been seeing this a lot in the public eye, and so we just want to take the time to talk about why they're happening and also the road of recovery to that. So, Pastor Chris, my first question for you regarding this is, why does it seem like pastors keep screwing up?
First question is probably, is it happening more often, or do we just have more awareness of it? You know, it's when a pastor fails, it's good clickbait. When a pastor fails, whether we like to admit it or not, almost all of us, if we see that headline, we click on it, we read about it, we want to know about it.
Right.
And then, as we've talked about, you know, your algorithm learns what you like to read. And so if you keep clicking on those, they keep showing up in your social media. They'll show up more in your news apps. And so you're just kind of trying to pay attention to, is this actually happening more, or do I just have more awareness of it? Because more people write about it, more people cover it. Now, either way, that doesn't make it less painful. It doesn't make it less wrong. But maybe it does help us understand. I don't think we necessarily live in a world where more pastors are failing than ever. But we probably live in a world where we're more aware of pastoral failures than we've ever been. You know, in previous generations, previous centuries, when church leaders messed up, it was primarily their local congregations that were aware and suffered.
Sure.
Now, we can learn about pastors failing in other states, pastors failing in other nations. We can read those stories. They produce documentaries about them, podcasts about them, all sorts of things like that. And so just kind of living with that awareness of, just because I hear about it more doesn't mean the church is in a worse shape. It doesn't mean pastors are worse than they've ever been. It just means I'm hearing about it more.
What is it, and I just had this thought when you were talking about it, what is it about these stories that draws Christians to them? I almost have this thought, and I'm trying to reflect on my own heart as well. Is there almost this subtle, subconscious enjoyment of reading these stories because it kind of makes me feel like I'm a better Christian than some of these other pastors? Do you think that there's an element of that, or is that probably looking too much into it?
It could be. I don't know. Maybe it's the same motivation of why we like true crime dramas and why we watch all those missing person documentaries of why you slow down at a car wreck and kind of rubberneck on your way by. Like, there's just something inside of us that is drawn to that. I don't know why they get so much attention, but they do.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Is this just a mega church issue as well?
No, absolutely not. I mean, the mega church pastors in the U.S., if they fail, those are the ones we hear the most about. Those are the ones people are usually most eager to talk about, to produce extra content around them. But no, I mean, pastors fail in churches of all sizes, throughout all points of history and all over the world. And they primarily fail in the same kind of areas over and over again. You know, their failures of morality, being unfaithful to their spouse, acting outside of the scriptural standards for sexual purity and sexual integrity. Their failures of integrity, where they are not honest, where they're maybe manipulative or deceitful. Their failures of abusive leadership, their failures of financial mismanagement. Like, those are kind of the ones that we see over and over and over again. And regardless of the scale, it's harmful to the pastor who fails. It's harmful to his or her spouse. It's harmful to their children. It's harmful to the local community that is hurt, and it's harmful to the larger body of Christ, and even harmful to other pastors like you and me, because now in the eyes of some, we get lumped in of, well, all pastors are like that.
Right.
The same way that some of our police officers, every time there's a negative story about a police officer in another part of the country, well, now that reflects poorly on them, even as they're doing their job with integrity here in Tulsa.
Yeah, and I think it's probably important to reflect on too. When we see some of these headlines, we kind of think of it as a one-time decision, a one-time action, when in reality, sometimes it is, but I feel like a lot of times it's the culmination of many decisions and many actions. So if we were to go back to the beginning, or you're to explain this in more depth and with a little bit more detail, why does this happen? Why does moral failure, pastoral failure happen?
Well, it goes, all the way back to the early church. In Acts chapter 20, Paul tells the Ephesian elders to watch out that savage wolves are going to arise from among them. And he's speaking to a group of church leaders and telling them from out of this group, not just from the church, but from out of this group of leaders, from among you, the enemy's going to deceive some of you, and instead of being shepherds, you're going to be wolves. Mm-hmm. And so it is living with this awareness that if God calls you into a position of spiritual leadership and you take on that role of a pastor, an elder, an overseer, even a deacon in a local church, in some ways it increases the enemy's target on your life because he wants to kill and destroy every person who follows Jesus. But the more leadership, the more influence, the more responsibility a person has, the larger the ripple effects of their failure are going to be. And so, yeah, it's not that a pastor just wakes up one morning and thinks, I think today is a good day to begin some immoral relationships, or today maybe I'll start stealing money from the church, or today I'll start trying to see if I can abuse staff members and volunteers and manipulate and deceive. It's always just kind of a combination of factors, of there's some sense of opportunity. Where the enemy seizes a moment. There's has to be some sense of justification in the heart of the pastor of, I deserve this, or I should be allowed to do this, or because of some other sacrifices I've made, God's going to let me do this. And then there's just that moment of, subtle deceptions and subtle sins, and eventually you've walked down a path you never intended to be on.
Absolutely. Happens because of those reasons. In a reactionary position, somebody who sees this happen, what do they do? What can they do in response to something like this that might shake the worldview? Maybe it's not their pastor, but it's a evangelist or a minister that they look up to, that they honor, that they respect. What do they do in response to this?
Sure. So there's probably a couple things, and I think you'd want to think of it almost down different avenues. Of first, you want to mourn it, you want to pray for it, you want to be careful not to sit in a seat of kind of self-righteous judgment.
Yeah.
But also, it's fine to call wrong things wrong. It's fine to call evil things evil. That's appropriate. Mm-hmm. When pastors fail, there should be discipline. Mm-hmm. There should be removal from ministry. It's where I'm thankful we're part of the Assemblies of God. And so we at Christian Chapel require all of our pastors to be credentialed with the Assemblies of God. And then if I make a mistake, if you make a mistake, it's not just on the local church to handle that, but we actually have elders and overseers within our movement who step in, and there's a well-established process of not just ministerial discipline, but also ministerial rehabilitation and trying to restore ministers first to Christ, then to their families, and if possible to the local church, but sometimes that's not possible. So when you see a story about a pastor failing, I would say you mourn for it, you pray for the local congregation. To me, that's always I would encourage people to pray for the congregation even before they start praying for that pastor. Yeah. But it doesn't mean they don't pray for the pastor. Pray for him or her, pray for their spouse, pray for their kids, and then kind of move forward. But then you also want to ask, why does that why does that happen? Like, what happened? Are there things we can learn from that situation to make sure those don't continue in other places? Right. So one of the reasons I think sometimes pastors fail is their success grows faster than their character.
Right.
Of maybe they got a lot of blessing, a lot of benefit early in ministry because they were talented, they were gifted, they had a lot of charisma, but they didn't have the internal fortitude to sustain that. Yeah. And so their marriage wasn't strong enough for the stress that was coming. They weren't firm in their identity as a parent. They didn't know how to handle the praise and the accolades or the stress. Yeah. And so it's kind of that picture of like if a tree grows really tall and really wide with a shallow root system, a strong storm is going to blow it over. Yeah. And so just kind of praying along those ways of.
Yeah, and I've heard you say that as well. Of like that's been a prayer for yourself, Angie, your kids. Of like, would the success never outgrow character? And I think that's such a. I remember the first time you said that, it had an impact on me as well, because I think kind of coming from college or growing up in the church in an evangelical setting, you're like, God, like I just want to be used for your kingdom, and whether that's in the ministry or whether that's in business or in education or wherever you feel like God is calling you to, I think that's awesome. But I think everybody has these like big picture ideas. And sometimes, there's these spaces where God in his grace answers these prayers, but we're not necessarily ready, or maybe we've pushed the bill and we force ourselves into these spaces when we're not ready. And it can be catastrophic as a shepherd and a leader, especially when you're leading that.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is this tension between someone being on guard as they're kind of heading into the future, and maybe in terms of just being on guard in general with leaders and maybe even with pastors, but also needing to have a healthy trust of the pastoral team with where they go to church?
Yeah.
What do you feel like the tension is there?
Yeah, that is the danger of just the prevalence of reading about so many different pastoral failures where you're not attached to the congregation. You don't know the story of what happened. But if you read that stuff long enough, it will start to poison your mind towards all pastors, towards all leaders in the Christian church of, well, I guess no one can be trusted. And I guess, and we hear that sometimes from people who have walked away from the church because of hurt they've experienced, the failure of a leader. And then they take that one failure and they apply it to everyone else. But I think if we kind of take a step back, we see the immaturity of that view. It's the same way of like, well, I know a few people who've been divorced, so I'm never going to get married. Yeah. Or I know a few kids who never turned out well, so I'm not going to have any of my, I had a bad boss, so I'm never going to work again. Like, you just can't really do that. And so with pastors, I would say, if you're in a local church, one, pray for your pastors. Like there is a real target on their back. The enemy really does want to destroy them, because if he can destroy them, it usually has a very negative impact on the church where they lead, and a negative impact on the view of the kingdom in that community.
Right.
So pray for them. Two, don't assume your pastor is worse than they are. I don't want people walking around just thinking, well, it's just a matter of time before these bums let me down again,
Right. Yeah.
On the other hand, don't assume your pastor is better than they are. Yeah. Like there is no pastor who's incapable of sin. Yeah. There's no pastor who's incapable of falling. And so then if you're in a position of leadership or a position of responsibility, or just kind of a well-established person in your church, ask questions of, what are we doing to make sure our pastors maintain a connection with the Lord? What are we doing to make sure they're connected to their spouse? What are we doing to make sure that they have safe avenues where they can seek counsel and they can confess their sins and they can have other people pray with them? What are we doing to make sure they're managing stress well, that they're practicing Sabbath, that their relationship with the Lord doesn't just become a job, but is actually a thriving part of who they are?
Yeah, in that, do you want to speak at all to ways that Christian Chapel helps care for staff pastors and pastors in general?
Yeah, so I think it starts before we ever hire somebody. Yeah. When I think back even to some of my buddies from college who I knew them well before we were all pastors, and then we all graduated, and some of us went to other schools, some jumped straight into ministry. And then 10 years down the road, you start to see like who's making it. And unfortunately, already by that point, you have a few who've kind of flamed out and made poor choices. And one of the recurring themes that I noticed was those guys who failed early in ministry usually were the ones who it seemed like they had got into ministry to try to solve a sin problem in their life. Like, I can't stop doing these things. I can't stop being this person. So I'm going to go to college. I'm going to pursue ministry. I'm going to become a pastor. And then being a pastor is going to be the extra motivation I need to keep this sin in check.
I never thought about that before.
Yeah. And almost without fail, that works for a little while.
Sure.
But eventually, if you don't let the Lord root the sin out of your heart,
right, it
just grows deeper. And eventually it comes out. And so our pastoral care starts on the very front end of in the interview process, in getting to know people. We want to make sure they're authentic believers, they walk in the power of the Holy Spirit, and that they're honest about previous failures and points of weakness, and can identify, this is how I have experienced victory over those things. This is how the Lord's leading me through. You don't have to be perfect, obviously, or we'd never hire anyone. We'd all get fired.
Right.
But there does need to be some sign of like, I'm not running to this job to try to beat my demons, but I'm running to this job, this calling, because of the Lord's direction in my life. And He has equipped me to meet the biblical standards and continue on that path according to His work inside of me. Rapid fire! Which current Christian Chapel staff member is most likely to have a documentary made about them someday?
Oh my! I know Godfrey's answer. In this rendition of Rapid Fire, we want to talk about the specific relationships that make a pastor's life healthy. So, Pastor Chris, what's the most important relationship that ensures the health and the quality of a pastor's life?
Your relationship with God. If you're not a Christian, you're not going to be a very good pastor. So that's got to be thriving. Can't be part of your job. It must be the core of your identity.
Wonderful. What about relationships regarding family?
Pastoral failures a lot of times center around sexual immorality and inappropriate relationships. Then yes, a healthy, thriving marriage is going to guard against those better than almost anything. So a pastor's spouse can't be a secondary thought. They must be primary. And as the spouse is primary, then obviously the family is going to follow along with that as well. You shouldn't sacrifice your children at the altar of ministry because you're the only parent they get. So you got to figure out how to be present and active.
Wonderful. And a part of these healthy relationships, how do mentors/friendships play a role in the life of a healthy pastor?
I think for long-term personal kind of integrity, success, relational success, you need people outside of your local congregation that you can have open and honest conversations with. So every year when we're onboarding new deacons at Christian Chapel, I give them a list of 4 or 5 of my friends and mentors, along with their email addresses or phone numbers. And I tell our deacons, if there's ever anything in my life you're concerned about, that you're uncomfortable talking to me about, or maybe I'm not responsive as I should be, here are 4 or 5 men that you can always call. They love me enough to call me, speak directly to me. I have a long-term relationship with all of them, and they can help me in that process.
Really good. What about healthy outlets? What are some things that pastors should do just to have an outlet regarding their healthy life?
Yeah, something you enjoy outside of, same thing it would be for most people. If you should have some kind of hobby interest outside of your work, your primary vocation, that just gives life to you, that's not super serious. Some guys golf, some guys hunt, some guys fish, some guys work out. I don't really care, men, women, whatever they do, just something that's healthy, God honoring, not sinful, obviously.
Yeah. Watch the Green Bay Packers.
I don't think that's good for your soul, but the Chiefs would be when they win. When they lose, not so much. Yeah. But figure out something.
Wonderful. Thanks for listening to this Rapid Fire. We're going to go back to the podcast. When we talk about, obviously, the fact that pastors are not devoid of sin.
Yep.
We sin all the time. None of us is going to be perfect. If any one of us was perfect, it's obviously a big red flag, because then we're claiming something that's not true. In that, what is that? And I don't want to draw arbitrary lines, but when we're talking moral failure, where there is a need for a pastor to step down permanently or for an extended period of time, and then we're just talking sin that every pastor takes part in, like, what is that threshold between, hey, this is just part of the sanctification process as a Christian, and you're also a pastor, and you need to be removed from your role as a minister of the gospel?
Sure. Yeah. Some of those are laid out for us in the scriptures, right?
Yeah.
The idea of like a husband of one wife, the idea that, well, if you've got multiples, you're disqualified.
Time to step down.
Paul's admonition to keep the marriage bed pure. If you're stepping out of bounds in relationships with other people, you're disqualified.
Yep.
And then at the same time, like if a pastor battles lust, should they be fired?
Right.
No, like that's a battle that they're fighting by the power of the Holy Spirit. If they're repeatedly giving into that, if they're a slave to pornography, if they're engaging in those relationships, those are disqualifying behaviors.
Yeah.
You think of your finances, like we're called to be good stewards. Now, if in your personal finances, you're fighting a battle of maybe I spend too much, maybe I'm carrying a little bit too much consumer debt, maybe we bought a house we couldn't afford, those things don't necessarily disqualify you from being a pastor.
Yeah.
But if you start stealing money from the church to make up for some of those things, well, now that does disqualify you, because you've moved into other, you've crossed other boundaries. So we want to think of those things, and even there, at Christian Chapel, you asked earlier, how do we help our pastors be healthy? One of the things we do is we give each of our pastors an annual counseling budget, where they are free to meet with a counselor in town. They don't need permission to do that. There's no approval process. There's just a set amount they're given each year, and they can meet. And so that provides a safe space to have some of those conversations with someone who's not affiliated with the church or maybe even with our particular movement. But just to kind of wrestle through, hey, here's some areas where I'm wrestling, where I'm struggling, where the Spirit's working. And that's a person who can kind of help them deal with it before they cross one of those lines where now, okay, certain actions are required and have to be taken.
Makes sense. No, I've taken advantage of that, and it's been a huge help. I remember, kind of just experiencing something, whether it was spiritual or just mental last year, and being able to kind of walk through that in a couple of sessions was really helpful.
Was it because Godfrey had been mean to you?
I don't want to comment on that. I get a little bit too emotional.
It was not. It was not.
It was
for
not.
the record.
Yeah.
It was not.
It had nothing to do with Godfrey.
Yeah.
I love Godfrey.
It was Amy Byler bullying you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. There's a lot of that going around. A lot of that.
Yeah, a lot of Amy bullying happening for sure. No, we really thank you, Pastor Chris, for your time in discussing this topic. I know it's something that's at the forefront, unfortunately, in a lot of people's minds, because it seems to just be happening all the time. And so if that's something that you're struggling with or you're walking through, maybe it was your own pastor or maybe a minister that you highly respected, I think it's important to talk and process that with other people, talk about it with trusted friends. I know pastors here at Christian Chapel are more than willing to.
Absolutely. And never let the failure of the few diminish the faithfulness of the many.
Yeah.
Even in that Acts chapter 20 passage where Paul is warning the Ephesian elders about wolves will come up from among you, he's also reminding them, remember how I served you. Remember how I was with you night and day. And I know for me, there was probably maybe a year or so ago, I had experienced a lot of those stories of pastoral failure. Some of them people I didn't know, some of them people I did know, and was sitting there on a Sunday just feeling a little aggravated about it. And as I did, I really felt like the Lord reminded me of that passage of, hey, think about all the men and women in your life who've been faithful, who've been present, who've been there.
Right.
And as you kind of rehearse those stories, it reminds you there are still a lot of good shepherds in God's kingdom. There are still people who are in it for the right reason, really trying to honor the Lord, really trying to love people, build his kingdom. And don't let kind of those loud stories of the failures diminish how many people have been faithful, not just in our lives, but over the centuries of the church.
Yeah. Honoring, obedience, quietly following the Lord. It just doesn't make the headlines, Pastor Chris. We're not going to consume it in our culture.
It doesn't. Nobody clicks on the headline that says, Pastor faithfully serves for 30 years and retires.
Like no scandals, no fraud, no financial embezzlement.
No celebrity.
It's out there.
Yep.
It's here too. So Yeah, thanks a lot for chatting with us about this. And if you like this video, if you like this podcast, if you enjoyed listening to it, go ahead and like it. We encourage you to subscribe, and we appreciate you listening and watching. Have a great day.